My name's Jordan, I'm 43, and I've always been the kind of person who lets things slide for the sake of peace, for the sake of family. But there's a difference between keeping the peace and letting people walk all over you. That line? My brother Dean erased it a long time ago, and this time, he crossed it in a way I'll never forget. Dean and I grew up close. He was the golden boy, varsity everything, charming, the one who never got in trouble even when we both broke the rules. I was the quieter one, the bookworm, as my dad used to say with a half smirk that always felt like a warning not to get too proud. That dynamic followed us into adulthood. Dean stayed the center of attention, throwing elaborate family barbecues, posting Facebook photos with perfect captions like #FamilyFirst, while I built a quiet life with my son, Theo. We were never flashy. I worked in IT, Theo read books the way other kids scrolled TikTok, and we didn't chase approval. But even so, I always tried to show up for family events to be supportive, even when it was awkward, even when it hurt. Theo is 17 now. He's always been different, not in a he'll grow out of it kind of way, but in the rare, once-in-a-generation way. He's quiet, observant, and thoughtful. He listens more than he speaks. When he was 8, he read *Sapiens* cover to cover because someone left it in a waiting room. He skipped a grade in middle school, started dual enrollment classes before he could drive, and yet he never rubbed it in. He wasn't cocky. He was just passionate, especially about philosophy and theoretical physics. But Dean never saw that. In Dean's eyes, Theo was just soft, the kind of kid who'd struggle in the real world. And no matter how many medals Theo quietly earned, Dean always managed to downplay them. "That's great," he'd say, "but the world doesn't hand out trophies for trivia." The graduation party was for Dean's daughter, Kayla. She's a lovely kid, cheer captain, accepted into a decent state school, and clearly adored by the whole family. And look, I was genuinely proud of her. I know how hard it is to be a teenager these days. So when Dean invited us to her party, I didn't hesitate. Theo was reluctant, said he'd rather stay home and study for finals, but I nudged him to come. "It's important," I told him. "We show up for family, even when it's not easy." The party was everything you'd expect: balloons, banners, custom cupcakes with Kayla's face printed on them. Dean rented out this over-the-top hall, catered by some local trendy taco place. Everyone was dressed like it was an awards show. We arrived a little late, and Dean barely greeted us. "Glad you made it," he said, patting Theo on the back like he was doing him a favor. I could tell early on something was off. There were these weird glances, whispered conversations when Theo and I walked by. My sister-in-law, Tanya, looked at us and gave this tight-lipped smile that said, "You don't belong here." I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe they were just overwhelmed hosting. Then, halfway through the party, Dean stood up and clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. All right," he said, grinning. "Before we get back to dancing and stuffing our faces, I want to do something special." He turned to a big table behind him. On it were wrapped gifts, elegantly boxed, neatly labeled. "I've got something for the future leaders in this room," he said. "The ones who are gonna make waves. You know who you are." He started calling out names. One by one, kids stepped up: Kayla's best friend, their quarterback cousin, a neighbor who got an internship at a fashion magazine. Each one got a tailored gift: a journal with their initials embossed in gold, a leather-bound planner. One kid got a smartwatch. I watched Theo out of the corner of my eye. He sat quietly, expression unreadable. I told myself Dean probably hadn't prepared anything for him, and that was fine. We didn't come for presents. Then Dean said, last but not least, "Theo." People turned. I felt a flicker of surprise. Dean waved Theo forward. "Come on up, buddy." Theo hesitated, then stood. He walked to the front, all eyes on him, hands awkwardly shoved in his pockets. Dean grinned and handed him a thin, crumpled package. It wasn't wrapped, just loosely folded in old tissue paper. Everyone went silent. Theo slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a torn composition notebook, half-used, with doodles and scribbles on the first few pages. On top was a yellow sticky note. It read, "Some kids just peak in high school." There was a beat of stunned silence. And then, laughter. It started with Dean's son, then Tanya. Then it spread. Like some awful in-joke I wasn't letting on. Even a few distant relatives chuckled. "It's just a joke," someone muttered. "Lighten up." Theo stood there, frozen. He didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He just nodded slowly, turned, and walked back to me. I didn't say a word. I just stood, took his hand, and we left. Right in the middle of the party. No goodbyes. Theo was quiet in the car. I kept checking on him, but he just stared out the window. Finally, he said, "I'm not mad, Dad. I just didn't expect it to sting that much." I could have screamed, but I didn't. I had to stay calm for him, because Dean wanted a reaction. He wanted Theo to look weak, but Theo didn't give him that, and neither would I. That night, Theo went back to his room and opened his laptop. He didn't sulk. He didn't rant. He got to work, tweaking his final application essays, triple-checking deadlines. When I brought him dinner, he looked up and smiled. "I'll be okay. Just wait." 3 days later, the letter arrived. I wasn't expecting it yet, but there it was, thick, with the crimson Harvard crest stamped on the front. Theo opened it in the kitchen. I watched his eyes scan the words. His lips parted, and then he laughed. Just once. Soft, relieved. "I got in," he whispered. And I just sat down and cried. The moment Theo said, "I got in," something clicked in me. It wasn't just pride. It was this slow burning fire that had been building for years, through every backhanded compliment, every time Dean rolled his eyes at my nerd son, every little jab disguised as a joke. I had taken the hits quietly, like I always did. But this time, Dean humiliated my son in front of a crowd. This time, he made sure we both felt small. That notebook? That note? That wasn't just a cruel prank. It was a message. One that said, "Your kid doesn't belong. Not with us. Not in the future. Not anywhere." But Dean had miscalculated one thing. He thought Theo peaking in high school was the punchline. He didn't realize that for kids like Theo, high school was just the warm-up. I made copies of the letter. Not scans, physical color copies of the actual acceptance package. I slipped each one into a high-quality envelope, addressed to each household that had been at the party. I didn't add a note. No snide comments. No, "Bet you feel stupid now." Just the letter, folded neatly, like an official announcement. It was the most polite middle finger I've ever given. But that wasn't all. You see, Dean had hired a professional photographer for the party. She'd posted a huge gallery of the event online, complete with shots of every gift moment. I found the one of Theo standing there with that torn notebook, surrounded by smirking faces. I screenshotted it. Then I printed it and framed it. On the back, I taped the Harvard letter. That copy? I delivered personally. Dean wasn't home when I stopped by. Tanya answered, surprised to see me. She looked me up and down like I just crawled out of a drain. I smiled, handed her the frame, and said, "This is for Dean. No need to text me. He'll understand." And then I left. That night, my phone blew up. Not from Dean. No, he went silent, hasn't texted, called, or even liked a post since. But the others? The ones who laughed? Suddenly, they had a lot to say. Messages poured in. "Hey, didn't realize Theo was Harvard-bound. That's amazing. Wow, we were just joking. Hope there's no hard feelings. I always knew he was brilliant. You must be so proud." Funny how quickly people switch sides when success becomes undeniable. My mom called too. She's always tried to stay neutral between Dean and me. "Maybe you should just let it go," she said. "Dean didn't mean it that way. It was just supposed to be lighthearted." I didn't raise my voice. I just asked if it had been Kayla and someone had given her that note. Would you still say it was lighthearted? She paused, then sighed. Point taken. And that's the thing. It was never about the party, or even the notebook. It was about respect, about dignity, about how people like Dean try to define success in narrow terms: loud, showy, popular. He couldn't understand that brilliance doesn't always walk into a room with a booming voice and a trophy. Sometimes it walks in quietly, listens, and builds something the rest of us can't even imagine. Over the next few weeks, the silence from Dean stretched. At first, I thought he was sulking. But then I heard through the grapevine that he was embarrassed, mortified, actually. Apparently, some of his friends were at the party, and a few of their kids didn't even get into college. And here comes Theo, the quiet kid, heading to Harvard. Dean had been bragging for years about being the successful brother, and now he looked like a fool. One of my cousins texted me, "You know Dean's been telling people you used a favor to get Theo in?" That actually made me laugh. I told Theo, and he just shook his head. That's what people do when they can't understand something. They rewrite it until it makes sense to them. Meanwhile, Theo kept working. He didn't let any of it distract him. He applied for scholarships, joined a summer research program, and started brushing up on quantum mechanics for fun. But every now and then, I'd catch him looking at that framed photo, him standing with that notebook. Not with bitterness, but with a kind of focused resolve, like it reminded him what he was working away from. Then, one night, I got a call. It was Kayla. She sounded hesitant. Hey, Uncle Jordan, can I talk to you for a second? I stepped outside. Of course. Everything okay? She took a breath. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About the party. I didn't know my dad planned that. I didn't even know he had gifts for everyone. I would have said something, but I was scared. I stayed quiet. Let her talk. And also, she added, I got my housing assignment. I'm going to be 2 blocks from Theo's dorm. That hit me. The kids were moving on. The adults? Maybe not so much. A few days later, Dean finally reached out. A short text. Just, we should talk. I stared at it for a long time. Because by then, something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of playing a part in a family that mistook cruelty for humor and silence for agreement. Tired of making space for people who never made any for us. So I didn't reply. Not yet. I had something else planned first. Something quiet, but unforgettable. I didn't respond to Dean's message right away, not because I wanted to ghost him, but because I wanted the right moment. For once, I wasn't going to let him dictate the timing, the tone, or the terms. And I definitely wasn't going to sit down over coffee like nothing had happened. The truth is, I'd spent years shrinking myself to fit into a version of family that had no room for who I really was. And I wasn't going to let my son repeat that cycle. Not after everything. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after the text, our aunt, my dad's sister, was throwing a family brunch. She was turning 70 and wanted to celebrate it old school, which meant everyone was expected to show up, sit through a long speech, and pose for dozens of group photos and matching outfits. Dean and his crew would be there, of course. And under normal circumstances, I might have found a reason to skip it. But I went. Theo didn't want to come. You sure it's not going to be a circus again? He asked. It probably will be, I admitted. But it's not about them. It's about what we do with the spotlight when they give it to us. He nodded slowly. Then I'll bring the letter. I raised an eyebrow. You sure? He smiled. Absolutely. The brunch was exactly what I expected, catered, stuffy, full of fake hugs and louder than necessary greetings. Tanya air-kissed me like we were on a reality show. Dean stood at the other end of the room, pretending to be deep in conversation with one of our cousins, but I could feel his eyes on us the entire time. Then came the speeches. Our aunt went on about legacy and family pride, and I mostly tuned out until Dean stepped forward. Of course he did. He took the mic and launched into a rambling story about how family isn't just blood, it's about values, and how raising strong kids is the greatest accomplishment of all. Every word felt like a performance. Every sentence was a thinly veiled pat on his own back. He talked about Kayla's scholarships, about how he taught her to block out the noise and focus on achievement, and ended by saying, and I just hope we all support each other's kids as they build their futures, no matter what path they take. He smiled right at me when he said it. Like that erased everything. I stood up. Theo looked at me, unsure. It's time, I whispered. I walked toward the front, calm and steady. Can I say a few words too? I asked our aunt. She nodded and handed me the mic, clearly surprised. Dean stepped back, arms crossed. I didn't launch into a long speech. I kept it simple. I want to talk about something that happened a few weeks ago. At a party. The room got quiet. I watched my son get handed a used notebook and a message that said he peaked in high school. A room full of adults laughed. And we left without making a scene, because I believed in what I still believe now: true accomplishment doesn't need applause. It just needs time. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a copy of the letter. The real one. Theo had laminated it. This, I said, holding it up, is Theo's Harvard acceptance letter. Not a favor. Not a legacy slot. Just years of work, discipline, and quiet perseverance. I turned and handed the letter to our aunt. You always said you wanted to brag about your nieces and nephews at church. Thought you might like to start with this. Then I looked at Dean. He wasn't smirking anymore. Sometimes, I added, you don't realize who's watching when you laugh. But kids remember. And so do their parents. I walked back to our table. Theo looked stunned, then proud. He reached over and fist bumped me under the table, like we'd just pulled off the greatest heist of all time. The silence lingered long after. No one clapped. No one made a joke. Not even Dean. After the event, people approached us quietly. A few apologized. Some tried to save face. One even said, "You really got him back, huh?" But that wasn't the point. It was never about revenge. It was about respect. About making it impossible to ignore what people try so hard to dismiss. Dean didn't speak to us at the brunch. But later that night, I got a second text from him. Just one word. Why? I didn't reply. Instead, I posted something on Facebook. Not a rant. Not a clapback. Just a photo of Theo holding his letter, smiling. No caption. Within an hour, it had more likes than Dean's last 6 posts combined. And that photo? The one from the party with the torn notebook? I mailed it to Dean. In a new frame. This time, I added something. A sticky note. Some kids don't peak. They rise. Let him sit with that. Because this time, I wasn't shrinking. And neither was my son. The months that followed felt different. Not just because Theo was preparing to leave for college, but because for the first time in years, our lives weren't orbiting around the family's approval anymore. We stopped attending events where we weren't wanted, stopped chasing validation from people who couldn't see past their own reflections. Our world got smaller, yes, but it got clearer too. And in that clarity, something beautiful happened. Theo blossomed. He didn't change to prove anyone wrong. He didn't need to. He stayed the same thoughtful, soft-spoken, fiercely intelligent young man he'd always been. But now, the world finally started seeing him the way I always had. His high school held a last-minute awards ceremony that spring. Apparently, once the administration learned about his Harvard acceptance and his recent published research with a university lab, they scrambled to honor him. They asked if he wanted to give a speech. He almost said no, but I nudged him. And when he finally took the stage, standing tall in front of classmates who once dismissed him, he opened with this. I used to think being quiet meant being invisible. Now I know it just means people need to listen harder. The room was silent. And for the first time, they did listen. Then came move-in day. The drive to Cambridge was long but peaceful. Theo packed light, just books, clothes, and a little wooden box with his favorite quotes. When we reached his dorm, he looked around, took a deep breath, and smiled. I think I'm going to like it here, he said. I hugged him, tighter than I probably should have. I already do, I whispered. I stayed one extra day, just in case he needed anything. He didn't. He already had plans, study groups, orientation dinners, even a campus chess club he was excited to join. He walked me to my rental car the next morning, and just before I left, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the notebook. The notebook. The one from the party. The torn one with the cruel message inside. I've been using it, he said, for ideas. I blinked. You kept it. He nodded. I like seeing where it started. I drove off that morning with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Pride. Gratitude. Relief. My son had taken something that was meant to humiliate him and turned it into his own personal monument. And Dean? He never reached out again. He unfollowed me on social media. Sent a half-hearted congratulations card through our mother that I never responded to. Word around the family was he felt ambushed and humiliated by the brunch. Some even suggested I should apologize for making a scene. But I didn't. Because what Dean really hated wasn't the scene, it was the mirror. A few more holidays came and went. We skipped most of them. The family dynamics shifted slightly, as they tend to do. Some relatives quietly sided with us. Others doubled down on pretending nothing happened. But none of it mattered anymore. We were out of their emotional quicksand. And then, nearly a year later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo frame. It held a new image, one I hadn't seen before. It was from Kayla's graduation party, but not the one of Theo with the notebook. This one showed Theo walking away from the crowd, head high, shoulders straight, while everyone else laughed behind him. He looked untouched, like he didn't belong to their world, and thank God for that. Behind the photo was a sticky note. Not typed, handwritten. I was wrong. He didn't peek. He launched. No signature. But I knew the handwriting. It was Dean's. I didn't tell Theo. I didn't post it online. I didn't frame it or reply. Because some things don't need an audience. Instead, I slipped the note into Theo's wooden quote box during winter break. He didn't notice right away. But one day, when he was packing to head back for spring semester, he opened the box and froze. He didn't say anything. Just looked at me, eyes glassy, and nodded. That was enough. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was simple. We lived better. We rose above. And we stopped asking for seats at tables that were never built for us in the first place. Theo graduated summa cum laude 4 years later. Dean wasn't invited. And when Theo took the stage to accept his honors medal, he wore a small pin on his lapel, barely noticeable, unless you looked close. It was a paper notebook, gold-plated, torn at the corner. After the ceremony, someone asked him about it. "Oh, that," he said with a small grin. "Just a reminder. Where you start doesn't define where you go." And that's the truth. Some kids don't peak. They ascend.